Hello everyone, welcome to another math video. In this video, I will go over how to solve absolute value equations. You can see here in these examples, there's a new set of grouping symbols called absolute values. And just to refresh what that means is absolute values turn any number into something positive. So if you start out with a -3, absolute values say, hey, make that positive. If you start out with a +3, absolute values say, hey, make that positive. And what that means is that there are two potential answers that give you a 3. How does that work with the equations? Well, when there's a variable in the equation, you will need to consider both of those numbers, the -3 and the +3. The only way this absolute value can equal 3 is if the inside equals 3 or the inside equals -3. And this is how you convert an absolute value equation back into a linear equation. It's going to always break apart into two equations, one positive, one negative, and you can see the positive is referring to the sign in front of the number the absolute value equals. So in this case, +3 and -3. When you solve each of these equations, you get u equals 9 and u equals 3. Now when you're working with absolute value equations, you should check your answers. That'll look something like this. You can substitute the answers back into the original equation and just check that both sides are going to be equal. So in the u equals 9 solution, we understand that this simplifies to 3, and the absolute value of 3 is 3, so this is a good answer. And in the u equals 3 solution, we understand 3 minus 6 is -3, but still in the absolute values is 3. So this is also a good answer. And that's it. There is a quicker way to check your answer that I will get into when we look at example 3. Example 2, we cannot start breaking the equation into two linear equations because the absolute value is not isolated. So make sure you isolate the absolute value first. And to do that here, you'll divide by -3, and that will give you the absolute value of 4p plus 2 equals 10. Okay, now we can go ahead and split this into the two different equations, 1 plus 1 minus. Remember, that is referring to what the absolute value is equal to. So a plus 10 in the left equation there, and a -10 in the right equation. From there, you can solve each of these equations to get p equals 2 and p equals -3. And I promise that both of these answers work here, even when you do the check. Moving on to example 3. We can see again, just like in example 2, the absolute value is not yet isolated. So let me get that isolated really quickly here. There we go. What I did was subtract 29 and then divided by 3 to isolate the absolute value. You can separate your two equations here. Remember, 4x will equal the positive version of 15, and 4x will equal the negative version of 15. From here, you can solve x equals 15 over 4 and x equals -15 over 4. However, in this case, neither one of these answers works. And that goes back to an absolute value always turning a number inside to a positive number. You can see in this step right here that the absolute value is equaling a negative number, which is impossible. So What that means is, since the isolated absolute value equals a negative number, that means this equation has no solution. And you can get to this answer, no solution, by going through, working out the entire process, and then checking your answers and finding out they both don't work. Or you can use mathematical thinking and remember that the absolute value will always equal a positive number, or we'll see in example 4, 0. So you can stop here and write down something to the effect of absolute values cannot equal negative numbers, and just jump right to the solution. All right, let's take a look at example 4. It looks like the absolute value needs to be isolated, so I can say plus 6 plus 6. That gives me the absolute value of 2y minus 6 equals 0. And it is okay that an absolute value, an isolated absolute value, equals 0. That just means there's no distance. And it works even still if you do the 2y minus 6 equals positive 0, which we just write as 0. And then we could write 2y minus 6 equals negative 0, which is just 0. So we don't even really need this negative here, which means that both of these equations are the same. So this is slightly different than what you saw in example 2 and 1 above, but it just ends up being the same equation twice. So we only need to solve it once. So when you go through and solve this, you get 2y equals 6 and y equals 3. If you add 6 to both sides, then divide by 2, y equals 3. And that does check out. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.